This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is up on Center Stage, the show about the arts and the artists behind their work. Daniel Asia, composer, author, mediator of the connection between music and Judaism. Composers build many bridges, and Asia himself is rigging a stronghold of communion between spoken word, texture of musical traditions, and a connection to the emotional impact that music holds for us all. He is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, a UK Fulbright Arts Award Fellowship, an MB Rockefeller Grant, and as of 2024, was inducted into the American Academy of Sciences and Letters. His orchestral works have been performed by the symphony orchestras of Cincinnati, Seattle, New Jersey, and the New York City American Composers Orchestra, just to name a few. He records with Summit Records. He has written for the New Criterion, Huffington Post, and the American Institute for Economic Research. The former conductor of the Seattle Symphony, Gerard Schwartz, and a passionate supporter of Daniel Asia's music, he has this to say of Asia's opera, The Tin Angel. The Tin Angel will become an instant classic. Musically, it stays true to its neoclassical roots, yet the libretto is a reflection of the gritty 1970s Lower East Side of New York City. This is unlike anything that has been done before. Well, the world seems to love Daniel Asia, and he is here with me on Center Stage to speak about his life, his passion, and his work. Welcome, Daniel. It is such a pleasure to have you.
Pamela, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Of course. And where are you speaking to me from?
I am speaking to you from my studio in Tucson, Arizona.
I love it.
Where I have lived for the last 38 years.
And so I guess Tucson suits you.
Tucson does, and my work at the University of Arizona did as well.
And how long were you at the University of Arizona?
38 years.
38
The entire time I've been here.
years. Oh my gosh. Did academia sit well with you? I mean, are you one of those composers that just loved that kind of vibe so you could do your thing and utilize the bright young talent around you?
I am lucky enough to be able to say that I enjoyed much about my time in academia. I loved my students. I loved working with them. I began to feel that most of them were my colleagues, particularly my graduate students, or that they became such. And that, as Martin Buber would say, my relationships with them became I, thou, and certainly not I, it.
I love
And that also makes for a joyful life.
You see, that's the most beautiful attitude to go into teaching with, isn't it? Wow, that's fabulous.
Yes, and I was also fortunate enough. The first director said to me, so what do you need to do to be happy in your position here? And I said, well, you've hired me as a composer. I write music in the mornings, so I guess that means that I should teach in the afternoon. And he took a gulp and he said, oh, okay. and that's the way it was. So I was able to carry on both my career as a composer and to work both full time really as a teacher and as a composer.
That's wonderful. But wait a minute, before University of Arizona, there was a brief time at Oberlin, I believe.
Yes. So, like I suppose many musicians, I led a peripatetic existence at the beginning of my career. I grew up in Seattle. I studied the trombone. I went to Hampshire College and then to Yale. Then I went into New York and started a contemporary music ensemble called Musical Elements. Married my wife, Carolee Asia, and then went to Berlin for a year, and then came back without a job, but was fortunate enough to then get a job at the Oberlin Conservatory, which wasn't in composition, but was rather in conducting. conducting the wind ensemble and the contemporary ensemble. So I was
Wonderful.
I'd spent my time really from high school on conducting and composing both. So I was able to move into positions that covered both of those positions rather than just composition.
Many musicians would covet your situation there, being a conductor as well.
Well, yes, I was very fortunate. Look, there have
Mm.
been a few others in the past, Mahler being a good example,
Hmm.
Leonard Bernstein another, and there's a guy named Boulez who also did it pretty well. So it seems to me that that's a natural relationship
Mm.
for
Mm.
composers as well as it would be for composers who played the piano or its predecessor. I mean, witness Bach, Mozart,
Hmm.
Beethoven. Uh, they could do two things at the same time. They
I know, it's
managed.
fantastic. It's fantastic. Now let's go back a little bit. You went to Berlin. You got married, and then you went to
Yeah.
Berlin. Tell me you took your wife with you.
Yes, I did, although that's a very good story because, of course, my mother said, how wonderful. You're going to get to have a honeymoon year in Berlin. And, of course, it turned out to be anything but that for various reasons. Let's just say there were some potholes in that wonderful highway. And but yes, we spent a year in Berlin. I studied nominally, I'll say that, I can say that now, with a composer named Lee Sang-yoon. Lee Sang-yoon was probably the most well-known Korean composer. And the reason I ended up studying with him is very simple. I wanted to study with Ligeti, who is in Hamburg,
Hmm.
and I wrote to Georgie and said, I'd love to come study with you. And he said, that's wonderful, but can you wait 3 years? Because that's how long my waiting list is. And of course, I wrote to the Fulbright people, and they said, sorry, Boychik, but that's not going to work. It's got to be this year. The money's allocated for this year. It's not fungible over the next decade. Anyway, so I called my good friend Earl Brown, who lived in Rye, and said, Earl, I got a problem. I've got this wonderful opportunity, but who should I go study with? And he said, well, I bet my friend Isang in Berlin would love to have you. So he wrote Isang on my behalf, and Isang said, sure, come on over. So we did. We studied for 4 months the German language in a little town called Schwäbisch Hall near Stuttgart.
Yes.
And then we found our way to West Berlin and spent almost a year in West Berlin.
Fabulous.
Yeah, yeah,
Fabulous.
it was exciting for me. Obviously, look, Berlin was not yet what it is now that the wall came down,
Of course. Yeah.
but
Yeah. That must have been an
it still,
amazing time.
yeah, it had the Deutsche Oper and had the Berlin Philharmonie, and so I was able to go to 1 or 2 concerts every week, in essence, to
What a
go.
luxury. Who was conducting the Berlin Philharmonic at that point?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't remember if Barenboim was already there, but I believe so,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because he got there pretty early. But we're talking about, yeah, almost 40 years ago.
Wow.
But I think it was he. And at the Deutsche Oper was of course a rotating group of conductors.
Legends, actually.
Sure,
And you must have
you
been
bet.
feeling in Berlin at that time that tension still with East Berlin. That must have co- added a vibe, to just living there. It was extraordinary.
Uh, there are only 2 places in the world, and I never thought of this until right now that you've asked that question. Because yes, West Berlin and Israel are the 2 places in the world where you feel differently than in any other country. And West Berlin, certainly. Look, we traveled in our rented car from Schwäbisch Hall to Berlin, and you travel on a road through East Germany, since Berlin is an island city, as it were, in the middle of East Germany, was then at least.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And therefore, and there was barbed wire
Yeah.
on either side of the road, guard towers, so that nobody could get on or off. And then you arrive in West Berlin, where of course you can travel wherever you want.
Yeah.
And of course, as
Mm.
I mentioned to people, once you realize that nobody in West Berlin was trying to jump over the wall to get to East Berlin, but of course the reverse did obtain. There were lots of people who got shot and killed trying to climb into West Berlin from the east. So we traveled over to East Berlin and
Mm.
traveled through East Berlin to get up to Denmark. And we're talking about a true totalitarian government. East Germany was among the very worst,
Mm.
whereas West Berlin was a modern city by
Mm-hmm.
then. Although, think about it, 79, that's only
I know.
30, 35 years after the end of World War II. So in
Mm.
East Berlin was a disaster still as soon as you got off the one or two roads for show.
Wow. So close. So
Yeah,
so far away.
yeah,
So extremely different planets. I know
yeah.
I was in Berlin auditioning when the wall came down and with the
Mm.
celebrations, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there have been as many champagne bottles in the streets
Mm.
as then,
Mm-hmm.
and it was an amazing time. Just
Yeah,
wow.
extraordinary.
And so, did were you ever allowed into the hallowed halls of Mr. Ligeti?
I never met Mr. Ligeti, unfortunately. I would have liked to.
Mm.
But I know Mr. Ligeti, or however you want to pronounce it, through his music. And that's probably the best way to know a composer, actually.
It probably is, especially when they have a 3-year waiting list, which
That's correct.
I'm sure it increased as he aged.
Hmm.
So, what did studying with Yoon give you then? What did you take away from that experience in your own
Oh,
composition?
I'm going to have to say I'm sorry, but not a lot. The reason is very simple. Isang operated on the basis that most European composers do of the master apprenticeship, where role where as a student you're supposed to essentially ape the style and music of your master, as it were. I mean, it didn't start off well. Let me put it that way. We arrived in Berlin and he invited us out to his house. Little did I know it was going to be a 3-hour bus ride. It was. It was unseasonably hot for Berlin. We
Oh my
arrived
gosh.
there. He offered no kindnesses, but ushered us into his study, um, looked at my music in the most perfunctory manner. And by that, I mean he looked through all of my scores in about 20 seconds, sort of flipping through them as you would a flip book, and said, ich sehe, dass Sie ein sehr gut Komponist sind. And for our listeners, I see that you're a very good composer. But, Sie haben ein große Problem.
Oh,
But
there's
you
always a
have,
but. There's always an aber.
yeah, always a but you have one big problem. I said, so new? Tell me what my big problem is. And he said, I can't tell you that until you've studied with me for at least 3 years. So you must write the Fulbright office and tell them that you want to study with me for 3 years. And that was that. And we left. And my wife and I looked at each other. We were silent for about 21 minutes as we walked back to the bus stop and said, well, the guy's a lunatic. We're not staying here 3 years.
No,
So what do we do? And we said, well,
unrealistic. Yeah.
let's look around Berlin, have a good time, and we'll
Hmm.
see. And then I was in the middle of a piece that was very important to me, that piece called Rivalries for Chamber Orchestra that
Hmm.
got played then by the Brooklyn Philharmonic. I conducted. It earned me really the United Fulbright Arts Award fellowship as a result of somebody having heard it, reviewed it, and somebody on the committee saying, "Oh, well, this review is outstanding, and this guy must be good. Let's take him."
I
Anyway,
love
but
that.
but the point is, and Esong said, "No, I want you to start a new piece," and I said, "No." I'm in the middle of this piece and I want to finish it, because he wanted me to start a new piece so I could write a piece
Yeah.
that he could direct and tell me how to write it, so it would be a little Esong. And so that's what happened with Berlin
So this is
and Esong.
interesting. As a teacher yourself, I'm sure you took away what never to become as a guide with your own
Hmm.
students. Yeah.
That's quite true. That's quite true. Well, look, I also have to admit, I never had an American teacher who said I should write like them.
Mm-hmm.
To
Mm-hmm.
the contrary, I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
why American universities are really the center, and conservatories are the center for the study of composition in the
Mm-hmm.
world. In my view, Europe is dead for in all sorts of in all sorts of respects, by the way, but certainly compositionally. They produce very fine performers. The Finns are producing the best conductors right now.
Mm-hmm.
Composition, they're dead as far as I'm concerned.
Really?
Yeah, that'd be my. I mean, if you want to go into it more deeply, I'm happy to do so. But um, I haven't been impressed with what they've been doing for many, many years, and it goes back to this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yes, there are a few composers who have been able to get out of the orbit of their teachers,
Mm-hmm.
but they haven't been able to get out of the orbit of the past and of European modernism, as exemplified by Boulez, of course, as the progenitor, really, of European modernism.
Interesting.
So this country is producing, well, not the best new music right now. That's a whole other matter we can take on. It certainly is the center for composition, in my view. That's my take on it.
Very interesting. This is
Hmm.
something I had not really stopped to think about. We live under the kind of umbrella of the greats of the past. And
Hmm.
of course, me being in the opera world, I'm looking at what's being produced at the Metropolitan Opera that is
Hmm.
truly new. Some of it is
Hmm.
not good, some of it is
Hmm.
extraordinary.
Hmm.
But I've not really thought about this situation in Europe as a whole.
Hmm.
Um,
Look, I'm making a gross generalization.
hmm,
I admit it. Maybe tomorrow we're going to discover the great next Bach sitting in some little place in Hungary or
hmm,
Romania, who's
hmm.
producing the greatest music that has ever been created in the 21st century. I tend to doubt it, or I would have heard of it. But then again, I'm not in the mainstream of hearing everything that's happening the
Hmm.
way I once
Hmm.
was.
Hmm.
But
It's
yeah, I think it's a fair assessment.
it's an interesting observation.
I thank you, God, for this amazing day. For the living green is of trees, and the blue through dream of sky. And for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes, I who have died am alive again today.
All right. Well, tell me, just on another note, exactly, entirely, did you and your beautiful wife, Carolee, did you have your honeymoon eventually?
No, and she's irritated about it still. And we're approaching our 50th anniversary. I wouldn't say that we ever had a real anniversary because we got married in the summer of 1978. 78. Yeah, 1970. Oh boy, don't let her hear this. 78. And I was up at Tanglewood studying with Gunther Schuller.
Mm-hmm.
And Gunther Schuller, he was almost loath to allow me to go down to New Jersey for my wedding.
I see. Well,
Okay, I mean, and I said, Gunther, it happens that my wedding was planned before you let me into Tanglewood. You're going to have to give me a little leeway here.
I love that. I love
And then
that.
I have to tell you, when we got to Berlin and I talked to the person at the either the Goethe Institute or the Fulbright Institute and said, I'm here with my wife, she said, oh, it'd really be much easier for you if your wife went back to America. And I
Well,
said,
yeah.
excuse me?
Oh my. Oh my.
Excuse me. Anyway, so no, there wasn't exactly the honeymoon. So after our wedding, my wife and I went back up to Tanglewood in the company of my mother and father and my sister. And she stayed with them, and I stayed in the bunk in the dormitory that I'd been given for the summer. Okay.
But yet this marriage has lasted 50 years.
It has.
Wow.
As Carolee and I talk about from the very beginning, there's been a lot of creative tension in our marriage. That's part of
Creative
our,
tension. I
yeah,
love
and
that.
it has supported us for 50 years and will support us until we both are no
I adore
longer of
that.
this world.
I adore that. If anything makes something work, it's that dash of tension, And as long as it's mixed with creative, hey, that's just fine. I
Mm-hmm.
want to take you back just a little bit, though. Talk to me about growing up in Seattle. How was Seattle for you? I am also from the Pacific Northwest, and I find the Pacific Northwest to be very special. I don't know if it's the kindest place for musicians such as ourselves when we were roaming the streets. But what was it like for you, Daniel?
I was exceedingly lucky. That's all I can say. At 9 years old, I went in to talk to the music teacher because, as you and I know, then all schools had music
That's
programs.
right.
And I told her, I'd really like to play the clarinet. Can I play the clarinet? And she looked at me and she said, well, you know, your two top front teeth protrude a little bit. I guess, I
Yep.
was going to need braces, which we'll come to in a minute. And she said, it's going to be really hard for you to form the correct embouchure
Sure.
on
Yeah.
the clarinet. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, how about the trombone? And I said, yeah, let's try the trombone. So I started playing the trombone and I discovered I had a knack for it. And I loved
Fabulous.
it and I loved playing. I just did. So I played it all through grade school and then in junior high school because there was such a thing as junior high back then.
Hmm.
And, I played in all of the orchestras and the bands and I went to summer programs. And uh, then when I got to high school, I went to a wonderful school called the Lakeside School, a private school in Seattle. I was lucky enough. And I had a wonderful teacher there. And I mean, beyond what anything you could expect, his name was Peter Siebert, and he's in his 90s now. And he was in the middle of beginning the early music movement. So he was in touch with all these cats, who are saying, let's look at this medieval and Renaissance stuff. And, so he said, why don't you learn to play the recorder family? So I did. So I got to learn how to, about Machaut and Schutz
Hmm.
and Dufay and Palestrina and all those cats. And then I had another private instrumental teacher he said, trombone, it's a great instrument, but you should learn to double. So why don't you learn to play the trumpet? So I did. And then at a certain point, it was the 60s, and I said, I'd like to play guitar. So I learned to play classical guitar and studied that for 4 or 5 years at least.
My.
Yeah, and then in high school, sort of towards the beginning, guess what? I had to have braces to correct the aforementioned protruding front teeth. So again, Peter said, well, look, I used to play trumpet and we had a brass choir. That we didn't have enough strings, but we had a brass choir that was pretty good. And he said, I'll play trumpet and why don't you conduct? And I said, really? He said, yeah, why not? And I'll teach you how to conduct and we'll look at the music together. And that was the first time I really got to look at scores.
Hmm.
Because I'd always
Hmm.
been just a trombonist. I played the part. Whatever they gave me, I played.
Exactly. Exactly.
Never
Yeah.
occurred to me, or it never occurred to anyone to say to us, hey, and here's a score. Oh, you're playing this symphony? Well, check out the score. Anyway, so I did that for a bunch of years. And then there were about 5 of us who were really excited about music. And he said, well, would you guys like to learn some music theory? And we said, please, please, please.
Yeah.
So as juniors, we got his first year theory course that he'd had at Amherst. And then as seniors, we got his second year theory course that he'd had at Amherst, or taking off from that at least. So, and then I played in the Seattle Youth Symphony, which had some of the greatest musicians of my age in it. A guy named Rolf Smedvig was in, who went on to become the principal trumpet player in the Boston Symphony at the age of 21, kind of like Jerry Schwartz again. And Stephen Ansel, who went on to Curtis and then in the Muir Quartet, and now principal of the viola section of the Boston Symphony. I mean, it was a cooking ensemble.
Wow.
But I only played in it for a semester. Why? I was a trombonist. Playing Tchaikovsky and stuff like that. And all that happened was you'd count 500 measures of rest and come in and get yelled at. And I said, this is not for me. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So for me, there was a lot of stuff. There was an experimental music group run by a couple of guys at the university, Stu Dempster and William O. Smith. And I'd go to their concerts to see what was going on, and they were doing very cool stuff. And
Marvelous.
So for me, it was an interesting environment. You're right, not as deep as what you'd find in New York or Boston, but also, not that Juilliard sense of cutthroat competition either.
Got
it's
it.
like,
You've got
okay,
it.
I'm going to play and I'm going to get as good as I can, and we'll see from here. And then I went off to a place called Hampshire College, which just closed a few days ago.
That's right.
And because I didn't.
Why Hampshire College? Why?
Well, it's really pretty simple. I applied to lots of places, to liberal arts colleges, because I didn't think I wanted to be a professional musician. It hadn't crossed my mind yet. And Peter Siebert had gone to Amherst, as I just mentioned. And he said, I know that Amherst is not a place for you. You're kind of a out there guy, kind of on the fringes of things. But there's this new place that's starting up, and it sounds kind of interesting. Why don't you check it out? So I did, and I applied to a lot of places because my college counselor had convinced me that I wasn't going to get in many places. I mean, parenthetically, I think he was anti-Semitic, but who knows? But that would seem to be at least part of what was going on then. Anyway, so I applied to 14 places, and I got into all of them except for Hampshire. I got into Oberlin, I got into wherever. I didn't apply to Stanford or Harvard. My father had gone to Harvard. I probably should have applied. I might have gotten in. But in retrospect, I didn't get into Hampshire right away, so I was going to go to Vassar College, which has a good music department. I was going to be in the first male class at Vassar. And then lo and behold, in the summer, I got in off the waiting list. And at that time, Hampshire was the most difficult place to get into. Bar none. Not Harvard, not Stanford, not Yale, not any of the Ivies. Anybody who was anybody and who was interesting wanted to go to Hampshire College. And for me, Hampshire College was a phenomenal experience. There are issues that I have with my education. I've made up for them over the last 15 years. I mean, most of the people who applied there had gone to prep schools. They'd had lots of great history courses, English lit courses, all of that stuff. I'd gotten through Lakeside concentrating on music already without doing a deep dive into that sort of stuff. I didn't know about economics, and I didn't get that stuff at Hampshire. But what I did get at Hampshire, I tried not to do music for about a month. And then I realized, I just have to do music.
Something's missing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't not do it. So I started a brass choir there, and I conducted it. And I went to the composer there and said, I think I have to write music. I don't know how to do it, but can you help me learn? And he said, yeah, let's do this. His name was Randall McClellan. His first assignment to me was start a piece with the fewest notes you can imagine. The fewest notes. And only add the next note when you feel you have to. It was such an interesting exercise.
Wow.
And it became my first published work, not until much later on. But my publisher published it. It was called Alex for solo oboe.
Yes, yes.
And anyway, so I wrote that piece. And that's sort of what I did from then on Hampshire was very interesting. Yeah.
How extraordinary that he was having you do the minimal amount of composition to begin with. It's like doing an outline for a book instead of just spilling right into all the dialogue.
Exactly. It was sort of thinking about, what do pitches mean? And okay, how many do I need to actually start to say something? Is it one?
Right.
Is it two? what does
Daniel.
Bach do at the beginning of a partita?
Yeah.
Or how does
Yeah.
he do it? It was a reductionist minimal way of thinking as opposed to more of thinking about music and musical materials as a gestalt. Thinking about, so what is a phrase or what is a theme? But it was very useful for me. He was very experimental, having had a very traditional training at Eastman. So I got an interesting approach, an interesting view of things at the beginning.
Well, I just have to say right off the bat here that I do believe that there is a certain destiny for many of us. And I believe that when the student is ready, the right teacher comes and the right things avail themselves to us. The thing that's so beautiful about you so far in this conversation is you were always asking questions. You were asking for that help. You were saying, I'm hungry and I want help in this. And I'll play the trumpet. I'll enter into that realm.
Right.
But what is it that you wanted to say with that first piece?
So the question for composers is, of course, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately your music is all about who you are, which means also everything that you've ever heard, everything you've ever played. And then the next step is everything that you can start to imagine you might want to say. Now, what did that mean for Mozart? I don't think Mozart had to think about it because he started when he was 6.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no thinking. It was just doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
As if he'd ride a bike. You get on the bike and you start riding. Well, you get at the table and you start writing music. I think that's what it was for him. And for geniuses like that, that's why it's so easy.
Yeah, it was there. He just needed to...
It was present. It was like learning any language for him. And he happened to be really good at it, which is a nice thing. For someone like Beethoven, I don't know when he started writing music. I'll have to look at Jan Swaffer's book again to see what he tells us about that. But, Beethoven had to study. He had to learn later on and learn about music, but he had it also clearly in his soul from the piano playing, and the years and years of piano playing, and had it in his fingers and his heart. But for him, then, it became more difficult because he realized he couldn't remain... This is difficult. I shouldn't be saying this, but Mozart, as he gets into his 20s, it seems to me, and then into his 30s, before he dies, he becomes a different sort of composer. Obviously, he matures. He discovers the things that he needs to say now as an older, younger man. Beethoven hits that earlier on. The bridge to me, or the difference between the first and second symphony. I'm not the first to say this. And then the Eroica. Come on, it's like you enter another universe, because he said, okay, now I know that I can say things, which is not to slight the first symphony. I love it to death. But I have to get out of the shadow of, or not I have to get out of, I am at a place where I need to get to something that is beyond a Haydn-esque model. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
What is that? What is that? And he found it, and he found it with every new piece. So,
But he was building. He was building that new era.
no question about it. But you see, that's an interesting way of saying it, because here's what I think. I don't think that he was building the new era. I think he was the new era. That was him. I don't think I'm not sure we have the classical style. I'm rethinking Charles Rosen. I think we have the style of Mozart and the style of Haydn, and then those who are also saying things at the same time. You might want to say that the Baroque is the music of Bach and Handel, and all those others who were writing in that Baroque period. But they didn't have the things to say that those people had.
It's true. It's actually true.
So I'd rather look at that. I know there's a style, but this is
interesting.
I say this fairly frequently now, what I've just said, but I also say music is the most uncompromising of art forms. It just is. How many great composers, and I know one isn't supposed to say that, but let's say it, right, for argument's sake, that there are composers who are in fact better than other composers, and some pieces better than other pieces, even in the oeuvres of the greatest composers. So how many great composers have there been at any one time?
Very good question.
Maybe 2, maybe 4. At the very highest level, who had all of those elements of genius, which is an innate capacity for writing and thinking about music. The ability and willingness to sacrifice all to sit and write music in a quiet room for hours and hours and hours, every day, week after week, month after month, year after year. The willingness to be self-critical.
Oh my gosh.
And say, no, that's not good enough. I mean, that's Beethoven, right? In a nutshell. No,
That's
ain't
right.
good enough.
And enduring
That's
the
not-
ups and downs and the critics and the depression.
Exactly, and all that stuff. Okay? And then last but not least, unless you had a patronage system, willing to put up with being the best of who and what you do, but pretty much knowing you ain't gonna be a millionaire.
That's
you
right.
ain't gonna be a billionaire, and
It's
you ain't
hard to
gonna be a
eat.
trillionaire. It's just the way it works. This is a lonely, low-paying journey. I mean, performers can hope for themselves that they will make a nice upper middle class living, right? If you're a star.
Right. If you're a star. Yeah.
If you're a star. And God bless them, Lang Lang, Perlman, Maria Callas. But even their success, we're just not talking about the kind of success of great industrialists who've
That's
been
right.
able to harness the energy of new things in the world.
Yeah.
Now, you and I are not made to be those industrialists. We're made to be musicians. And it's okay that we live in an upper middle class world. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But it's just you have to understand that there are certain talk about glass ceilings, baby. I mean, come on. Come on. We're talking about glass ceilings that are half a mile thick and that are already pretty low in the stratosphere. And that's just the way it is, and it's okay, and I don't begrudge anybody in our business who makes a couple of $1 million a year. I really don't. Because in comparison to these other guys who are pulling in 10 and 20 and 30, I mean, there's a whole group of them. And I don't begrudge them their intake either, by the way. But I just read a wonderful the first draft of an article by a colleague of mine. I won't state his name now because he doesn't know if the article will ever get published. But he said, look, that's the reality. You know, these ideas that there are great stumbling blocks because of all sorts of societal reasons. He said, sure there are. He said, but look, at Juilliard at any one time, there are 200 pianists studying who think that they're going to make it out in the world and play concertos with symphony orchestras. And when you ask them, so how many are actually going to? What's the answer? Maybe two.
Maybe.
Maybe two. Composers? Come on. Ridiculous. Anyway, how did we get off on that?
Interesting.
But it is
very
interesting. It is interesting.
And I'll tell you why as well. I mean, for a whole other faction, and that is I'm terribly aware of the fact that the arts are diminishing or being supported in school systems and let's say just by the general public. Mm-hmm. In my show, because I like to talk about your beginnings. I like to talk about any artist's drive. Because if there is a young person that's sitting out there on the fence and they don't know which way to turn right now, and the temptations are so great with everything you're talking about right now, they can go into banking and have a sweet life. Or they can stay with their own sense of truth, suffer on so many levels, but really, really, really live as you and I know. And I'm so happy to be able to delve into all of your lives. I mean, I remember in the same way I was talking to Jerry Schwartz, and how he was at Aspen and he got lucky and he got to conduct, and then the sky's the limit. But there are these things that are gifted to us along the way, and if we're looking, we can see it. And for anyone out there who's listening to your words right now, and the fact that you went to a composer and said, "How do I do this? How do I do this composition thing?" I mean, that's just the entry to the first bridge you have built, and your bridges have been many.
Yes, I've been lucky, but everybody has to be lucky in their lives. You hope for luck.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, Dan.
But you have to be also incredibly well prepared to take advantage of that luck.
And to find that luck, you've got to be out there and working. You've got to be with that discipline. And this is what I say to every one of my singers who's out there auditioning for a big job. I say, you only take the work away with you. That's all you do. You go audition, you walk away and have a cup of tea, and you remember the work you've done. Don't worry about tomorrow, the job, anything. That's what lives.
I couldn't agree more. But we're living in a complicated time, Pamela.
Yeah, we are.
And I both know where
we are.
Many of our young people have no sense of themselves or of who they are, and they haven't been pushed gently in a way of saying, so what's going to give your life meaning?
Yeah.
What do you want to do with your limited time here on that earth? One of the things I've tried to impress on my students, or when I give talks, is I'm not sure anybody told me early on, what do you think you want to do when you're 50 years old or 55? What would you like to have done? What kind of journey would you like to have traversed? Where you can say to yourself, yeah, I'm glad I've been alive.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm glad I've done what I needed to do and wanted to do, and maybe I've added something to the world in my own small way. I don't think most of our young citizens get that anymore. And they certainly don't at the university, and they certainly don't.
Well,
I don't think from their families much anymore. But
this is the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you and I know what we're talking about. You and I are from the same era where we did not have cell phones and that sort of distraction.
That's right.
I remember when I saw that beautiful film Wall-E about the little robot. and he's living in an earth that's been destroyed, and everyone is on a tablet in wheelchairs because they can no longer walk. I mean, and I remember when I saw that film, I thought, oh my God, this is just a hint of the future, and indeed, we're seeing it. And but that's another subject for another day. I'm just thrilled that you have found your sense of, let's call it your moment of zen in what you do, and the fact that you've done it for such a long time and you're still storytelling through it.
Yes,
And
I am indeed.
that gets
I
me
am
back to your
indeed.
first piece again.
Yeah.
What
Oh,
did,
back to the
what
first piece.
what
Yeah.
did you want? What
What
did you
is it
want
that
to
you're
say?
trying to say?
What were you trying, or were you aware of it at the time, Daniel? And certainly, even if you weren't aware of that, it doesn't matter because you put a pen to paper and you created something beautiful.
Yeah. So here's I think the point. Yeah, we're back to Mozart. So Mozart wasn't trying to say something. He was just saying
He was
something.
just born with that. Yeah.
And there's but think about this. I think all composers, look, you confront the blank page and you say,
Mm.
okay, what note do I start with? Or you say, do I want to start with, is it bum, 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 ba-dum, bum? What's that? Bum, bum, that's a perfect fifth. Bum, 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 ba-da-dum. I don't know what I'm saying, but let's keep saying more.
Okay.
Bum, dum, 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 do-ee-oo. Ooh, so I had eighth notes and quarter notes, and then I added a little afterthought, a little quick figure. Bum, dum, 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 da-dee-dee. It's all within pretty confined range. Bum, bum, dim, dim, bum, dwee. Ooh, what if I go up a major ninth? It's 2/5. Ba-dee-dee, da-da-dee-dee, bum, dum, dee. That's kind of cool. So, what is it? It's not trying to say something. It's saying something.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I'm saying, and I don't know what I'm going to say. It's the purest experience of consciousness that's available to us
That's
in a
fascinating.
certain way. It seems to me, and the same with the painter. The painter doesn't know what he's painting at any given moment.
Oh, yeah.
You are actually in the flow of it. You as a performer, you're trying to say something, but you're just saying it, or else all those hours of practice, or else you'd be practicing. And you've already practiced. You've already done all of that. You know what you wanted to say. And now you just have to get up there and, goddamn it, say it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Eventually, you just have to say it. You have no choice. And that's what unites composers and performers. Now, performers are generally saying something that they've been asked to say.
Okay.
But you've been asked to step into the flow of consciousness of that composer who somehow has been able to put note after note after note in a way that convinces you and everybody, or else he's made a mistake in letting it out of his studio, convinces everybody this is the only way it can be. But I, as a composer, I know that ain't so.
Yeah,
At
exactly.
every moment, I had to figure out, good God, what goes next and what rhythm goes next. But sometimes you get in that flow and it just happens.
So this is a
You
favorite
see?
subject of mine is the flow.
Yeah.
If you find yourself in the flow, Daniel, do you just stand back and let it just evolve then?
Oh, you just watch.
Okay.
All you do is you
That's
watch
ideal.
it. You watch it come. And it's something that, we don't know where it comes from. And that's why, I mean, personally, I know there's a God because I'm not writing this all myself sometimes. I know that. Sometimes something takes over and there I am and I'm just going and I say, thank God, let's just go, baby. Let's speed it up. Come on, a little faster. This is too good to be and it's not going to last forever. So let's hold on as long as we can.
I love that.
But
I
yeah, I
think
mean, it's
that's
just
I
when
think that's
things just happen.
really authentically honest right now, and I adore that. See, that's what I love about the whole state of the arts. It's when we find that honesty in the storytelling that we're giving with whatever we're
Sure.
doing, whatever it
Sure.
is, whether it's trombone
Yeah.
or singing or,
Yeah.
the artist on canvas. And you're
Yeah.
right. So many times the artist doesn't know what he's going to do, and somehow he just starts, like Mozart, starts putting the paint on the canvas, and then something appears.
It happens.
And this is that divine
It
element
happens.
that I find so beautiful about the lives that we live as artists, that
Yeah.
is beyond compare.
Yeah.
Wow.
And sometimes, though, it's a real drag.
Well, yeah,
It's
there
the
is
bi-
that.
it's the biggest drag in the world, right? When you can't quite learn that part, there's just something about it, or you're at a moment in a piece and it just doesn't happen.
Yep.
You just can't figure it out.
Yep.
And that's, by the way, I mean, I've written about this, haven't I? Or is it Jan who mentioned it recently? Anyway, it's when you step back and you're Beethoven on those walks in the woods.
Exactly.
You're
Exactly.
Zhevsky, who says every hour he takes off for 10 minutes and he flops on a sofa or a couch and he reads People magazine. And then you go back, and you say, "Oh, I was so stupid. Now I see what
Now I
needs to
see.
be." You just allow whatever that is. I've been doing a lot of reading and I'm writing. I'm sorry if I'm getting off track a little bit here, but a book. It's a real 1,600-page book by a guy named Ian McGilchrist, and he's talking about the influence and the differences in the left and the right hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the right hemisphere where musicians mostly reside because it's all about flow.
Yes.
And the problem, of course, is when the left hemisphere takes over and says, no, we're going to solve this problem like an equation. Let's
Yeah.
figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And the right hemisphere says, no, we're not solving it like an equation. We're solving it as if it's a river. Where does this river go next? And what eddy do we find ourselves in? And what are the currents? And let's go with that and see what happens. And that's what happens when you go for a walk and you let the right hemisphere take over.
Without question. Yeah. Yeah, Julia Cameron has been writing about that for forever. And
Right,
and you're absolutely
right,
right.
right.
Beethoven went out for his walks. He went out into nature and look what happened. Oh
That's
boy.
it. That's it.
Well, but let's shift a little bit here because I feel that there is such a divine connection with you, and you have written about this and spoken about it
Mm,
with your beliefs in Judaism
mm,
and the ritual of and your music.
mm,
Can you go into this? Because I believe that in any religion, of course, there is that sense of discipline in the ritual, and
mm,
there's a beauty in that, right? I mean,
mm,
we saw that in all the Bach chorales that he would write for every
mm,
Sunday.
mm, mm.
You personally, yeah, how has
Yeah.
this driven your work or driven your focus?
So I grew up as a Reformed Jew in Seattle,
Mm-hmm.
which at the time meant a fairly classical Reform position, which was, certain things that have been traditional can be jettisoned. We don't have to sing the reading of the Torah, of the first 5 books of Moses. We don't have to sing the Haftarah, which is the writings and the prophets,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of every Sabbath service. We can just speak them. We can have a choir, which we do. We don't have to have a cantor who leads the prayer.
Okay.
So I grew up in that kind of environment. There was a wonderful guy, a lay person, who had one of the most beautiful voices. His name was, I think, Cy Kaplan. Boy, I think that's his first name. I know his last name. He was just gorgeous. I remember just listening to him singing and thinking, God, how beautiful is that? Then, when I was about 16 years old, somebody came to participate in a bar mitzvah. And they sang the reading of the Torah
Mm-hmm.
and the reading of the Haftarah. And I thought, my God, I've never heard anything so beautiful. I didn't act upon this at all. When I got to Hampshire College, there were a bunch of students, and they started the first course on the Holocaust itself, but in a total large view, from back view. In other words, what happened, who did it, to whom was it done, what was the culture of those who were involved, the Germans and the Jews, what were the entire destruction process itself, and then what happened afterwards. What did it mean for literature, for religion, for philosophy, for poetry? So at Hampshire, you only took one course if you took courses at all per semester. So it was a year-long course, and this was an in-depth course. And so I was involved in things Jewish, and through this, and with Jewish observance. Then I got to New York City after Yale, and I was invited to join a small prayer group of conservative Jews. And these were the young rebellious group of the conservative movement. And they were interested in what prayer meant and how to actually get what's called devakut, intentionality, back into prayer. So it wasn't rote. It wasn't a suburban experience, if you'll excuse that defamation of suburbia that had some great things for it. But the suburban prayer experience, where prayer was done more ritualistically than it was for its actual intent on trying to promote a connection to God. Anyway, I worked with these guys. I studied with them. I prayed with them. And I can say that, yeah, that had great meaning for me and in finding my relationship to God. And at some point also, well, it wasn't at some point probably, there was a cantor up in Milwaukee, Cantor Eicher. And he said, I want to get some cantors together and some Jewish composers together. So he did, and he brought us all together for a weekend. And we composers studied what's called chazanut and trope, which is the singing of the prayers and the special kinds of phraseology and scales that are used. The cantors got to know us as people a little bit and got to hear our music and what we did. And then we were sent off on an assignment, which is to write music for your cantor. And we came back the next year, and we all had done that. And I had not studied trope per se. It's interesting about this because most of these things in the Jewish religion previous to now were learned one-on-one with somebody singing and you imitating.
Mm-hmm.
Then we got what? Then we got tape and cassettes. You could put everything on cassette. You could listen to it. I mean, before then, people put stuff on 78s. And I know of various people who learned their section for their bar or bat mitzvah through 78s or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that cantor, a few years later, called me and said, I'd like you to write a piece for me and a couple of guest artists who are coming to do a concert. Oh. And I said, well, that sounds exciting. And I did. And it's a piece called Psalm 30 for baritone, piano, and violin. And I don't know if that's the first piece. I'd have to think about it. But it may be among the very first pieces that I wrote based on Jewish texts. Maybe I'd done one before. I'd have to see when Breath in a Ram's Horn was written, based on Jewish text written by my favorite American poet, Paul Pines, who I just think is one of the greats. But he's an American, Jewish American poet. Grew up in New York, and so a lot of his things are about Judaism. Mm-hmm. And so I set lots of his texts, and then I ended up setting Amichai's texts. Yehuda Amichai, who's one of Israel's foremost poets.
Indeed.
And then I combined it all in my fifth symphony called the Songs and Psalms, which is based on, lo and behold, the text of Amichai, Pines, and the biblical Psalms.
Beautiful.
So, um, and lots of other pieces along the way, I
Yeah.
would say,
Yeah.
therefore, on Jewish texts. Probably about a third of my output. So it seems to me part of becoming a whole artist. We've asked this question, so how do you know what you want to write? Well, you don't,
Mm-hmm.
but you are forced by necessity, and the
Mm-hmm.
only thing you can offer anybody is you and your life experience in your music. Nobody needs to hear me writing second-rate Bach chorales or a third-rate post-Mullerian
Mm-hmm.
symphony. They need to know what
Mm-hmm.
Asia has to say.
Mm-hmm.
If I have anything that's going to last, it's going to be something coming from me and my voice.
Yeah.
So all I can offer is who I am and my vision. All Beethoven could offer is, here's my experience being human. And I express it through the language of music in the kinds of structures that I think are appropriate for what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
that's all any composer can do, and if you have the tools and the capability of doing it, that's what you do, and you do it to your very best ability. And who knows what will last? We have no idea. What I say to people, look, I'm not a Beethoven. I'm more like, well, let me put it this way. I'm more like Beethoven and more like Stravinsky than I am like Haydn or I am like Mozart.
Okay. I
What do
like
I
that.
mean by that? I didn't start writing music when I was 6.
Right.
I'll never write 112 symphonies or whatever Haydn wrote. No chance of that. But, Beethoven, he wrote 9. And by the way, he grew with each one, and
Mm-hmm.
he had to work really hard at it. And Stravinsky, why did he stop writing those
Mm-hmm.
ballets? Because each one took him 2 years, and he said, "I've got a family to support. I got to figure out another way of doing this." But it took a long time, and yeah, he's pretty good writer of music. So all I can hope
Indeed.
is, I write every day. Don't let anything out of my studio unless I love every note and I'm convinced that everything is there where it's supposed to be. And in 100 years, they'll tell us, is it John Adams you want to listen to or is it Dan Asia?
Yeah.
Do you want to listen to Bill Balcom or do you want to listen to Dan Asia?
Yeah.
We'll see how it shakes out.
I love that.
Bach didn't make it until Mendelssohn found him,
That's very true. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? So we'll see.
We'll
Time is
see.
a great arbiter and great sifter of those things
You
that
know,
we
I,
finally hold to be true.
I just have to say, you are the most mellow of all musicians I have ever spoken to. The way your thoughts just kind of waft through you and you sit with it, and I love it. I think it's
That's
that
very sweet, Jan.
I'm
It's it's
I'm sh-
because it's because, of course, I've lived a pretty long life so far. I've been pretty lucky.
Mhm.
So I don't quite have that aggression and tension that I had as a kid. I have definitely mellowed. It's like, look, I've done everything I can do so far. I'm trying to do more stuff. I am, but here's what I am. Here's the music. Take it or leave it.
I
It's
love
up
it.
to you. It's up to
So
you.
you and Paul Pines, you saw eye to eye.
Oh boy, did we. Oh boy, did we. Yeah, yeah. We met at the MacDowell Arts Colony in
Okay.
the year before I got married, 1978. Um, and
This is a long association.
oh yes, um, we were at the MacDowell Arts Colony, and we started playing ping pong together after dinner. And
This one does.
at the beginning, he beat the crap out of me, and by the time we were done, I beat the crap out of him. Okay, that's how things changed over
Equitable.
time,
Yeah.
equitable. But we brought this passion to this game, and I realized after a certain amount of time that I really should ask him if I can see his poetry. And I thought, it got to make it or break it, because what if I don't like it? I can't lie to this guy. I couldn't just say, oh, this is nice stuff. I wouldn't have been able to do that. I still can't. If somebody writes music and they send it to me and they say, what do you think? I say, well, okay, here's some things to work on, or here's some problems, or here's some issues, or here are the strengths, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I read his poetry, and all I can tell you is I just found a soulmate. I realized I had found a soulmate.
How divine.
So, yeah, I mean,
That doesn't happen often.
No, it does not. It does not. And so I went, and within a year, I'd written a major piece called Ossawa Island Dream on a cycle of his of, I think, 8 poems. And we performed it downtown at Cooper Union in New York with my group. And he came and he said, yeah, this is pretty cool. So I've been sending his texts ever since then. And
you see what I mean? This laid back
Yeah.
style of yours? Yeah,
Yeah.
super cool.
Yeah, and he died, I think now almost 10 years, which I can't believe. On my birthday. On my birthday.
There could be some symbolism in that, Daniel.
Well, symbolism, and not to mention synchronicity. He was a believer in synchronicity, like Schrodinger,
Okay.
who the great physicist who talked about Schrodinger's cat, both dead and alive. So,
I love
yeah,
it.
it's been, along with my wife and my children, I put Paul Pines right up there as almost next in line. Because, we talk to each other a couple times a year, and whenever he'd write a new book of poetry, he'd send it to me, and I'd almost immediately pick out 4, 5, 6 poems that I said would just have to set.
Yeah, they would leap out
Have
to
to
you
set.
as a
They would,
composer.
exactly. They would just leap out. And, sometimes I get reviews and people say, well, I don't quite understand these texts, or I have to unpack these texts, or, the music and the poetry, I don't quite understand why he did it, blah, blah, blah. I never got that from Paul. Paul would hear stuff, and it was as if, again, we were two souls that you're in. And he'd say, oh, I know exactly why you did that. I know why you said that. And he'd say sometimes, of course, oh, you saw something in that poem that I didn't even see. But of course, you're right.
Oh, I love this.
It's very much susceptible to that interpretation, of course. Because, of course, what's the closest thing in literature to music? It's not novels. It's not short stories. It's poetry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because poetry is also something that's rather not always completely formed, or that's completely formed but never can be read completely in one way and say, that's it. I mean, you as a performer, that's why we have performers, is it's never the same, right? Thank God for you guys.
It's true.
Which
Very
is why
true.
I have a hard time listening to my CDs, because I just don't want to listen to recorded stuff anymore. I want to go hear it live.
Oh,
It's
wow.
not real. It's not real unless it's live. It's not. I'm not hearing it the way it's supposed to be unless it's live. I can study it on a CD. That works fine. But I can't hear it in the deepest sense of that word.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't really hear something, and you understand that as a performer.
Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
We were robbed of that in COVID, and we're still trying to get it back. I mean,
That's right.
wow.
That's right.
So you two married up your minds for this opera you have written.
Ah, the opera. I've forgotten about that, Pamela. Yeah, so at a certain point in the early 2000s, I think around 2006, we're going back now 20 years. It is now 20 years. And I said to Paul, look, I've said so much poetry of yours. I've never written an opera. I think it's time for me to write an opera.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea if I can. I don't know if I'm really an opera composer. You know, we talk about composers being of the theater.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
like Wagner. I mean, he wrote operas. He didn't write symphonies or
That's
chamber
right.
music. He wrote operas in the same way that Mahler wrote symphonies.
Mhm.
And now we have Philip Glass, you know, who's written, what, 50 operas or whatever. You know, okay. He discovered, oh, I should be writing operas. That's what I was made to do. Okay. And then there's, you know, again, that guy named Beethoven who said, God damn it, I want to write an opera. I want to try this.
Mm.
So again, I was sort of in the Fidelio mode. I said, I think I
Mm-hmm.
need to do this. I've written 4 or 5 symphonies now. I've written a lot of chamber music, tons of song cycles. I got to see if I can do this. So I said to Paul, would you do something with me? And he said, I'd love to. I'd love to. And I said, fantastic. Well, where should we start? What do you think? He said, well, you remember that book that I was writing when we met? That's The Tin Angel. And I think The Tin Angel would make a fantastic opera. I mean, it's got murder, it's got love, it's got dope, it's got drugs, it's got
Mm-hmm.
alcohol. I mean, everything in it.
Yep. Yep.
And I said, wow, wouldn't that be cool?
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
so I said, okay, let me figure out what you do to get an opera written. So I'd had a wonderful colleague, and his name was Lou Spratlin. And Lou had been a professor of mine at Amherst, and he'd written a wonderful opera, or was writing it when I knew him then, for his good friend Yehudi Weiner, who had started or was in charge of the New Haven Opera, New Haven, Connecticut. So he wrote Yehudi this opera. And in fact, the same time that I met Paul, Lou was up at MacDowell Arts Colony with us, and he played us the second movement of his opera. And I can say this now. I think, you know, I'd never been a big fan of Lou's music. I thought it was overwrought, too academic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this music knocked my socks off. I just couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. Anyway, the opera company went bankrupt,
Mm-hmm.
and Lou couldn't get the damn thing performed. He spent 25 years or 30 years trying to get it performed.
Wow.
Santa Fe finally did it, and a year before, a group run by a former student of his in Boston performed an act of it, and he won the Pulitzer Prize for it.
And there you go.
So I thought, okay, you don't write an opera unless you have a commission, but you hope that the people commission it don't go bankrupt.
Right. You hope.
So I raised a little bit of money so that Paul could take off from his day job teaching at what became SUNY Adirondack
Yeah.
campus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he spent 6 months going through 9 drafts of the libretto, tightening it up, reducing it. I mean, there are so many characters. There's still way too many characters. We're going to go through and try and reduce it again. And then he and I met in Santa Fe at a friend's house there for a week, and we spent a week going through the libretto. And that became the 10th and final draft. And then I started to find people who might be interested in doing this opera, in performing this opera. And the first bite was from Central City in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And a guy there, I probably shouldn't state his name now, was very taken by this. And he said, will you and Paul fly out so we can talk about it, go over it? You can see what we do here, and we can figure this all out. So Paul and I flew out. We spent a day or two or whatever. We looked at the venue, and we thought, what could be more perfect? You know, this wonderful little opera company that does stuff in the summers, not that far from Denver. We were on. He said, great, the only thing I have to do is talk to my board. Silence from my end on that. Because, yes, so a month later we got a phone call from him. He said, I have bad news. I'm sorry, but the board wants me to raise $1 million or $2 million for the endowment and not for a new opera.
Right.
Okay, so that was that. Then Kansas City got interested. Good opera company. And I said, well, fantastic. What do we need to do? He said, well, we can talk more as things get closer, but we're booked for about the next 7 seasons. So we can do it sometime after that. And again, there was a long pause. And I said, 7 years?
Yeah.
I mean, I could be dead by then. You could be dead by then. The whole world could not be here by then. Okay, well, get back to me and we'll see. And then, of course, whoever was there, he died within a year or two. And that was, I was right. I was right. And that was the end of that. So then I wrote to a dramaturge I said to Paul, I'm sorry, parenthetically, enough is enough. This takes place in the Bowery and the Jazz Club in the 1970s. The New York City Opera, I think, had already folded by then. Let's go to the Met. I'm going to send this stuff to the Met. Send it to the Met, to a guy named Paul Cremo, the dramaturge. Didn't hear back anything from him. I didn't expect to, but I hoped I would. And I finally got up the gumption and said, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to call this guy. I called him, and I said, hi, I'm so-and-so. He said, oh, hello. And I said, look, I'm going to be in New York in about a month. Complete lie, complete fabrication. Would you like to meet with Paul and me? And he said, I'd love to meet with you and Paul. I said, you would? He said, yes. I said, let's get a time and date. We did. So Paul and I went to the meeting at the Met, and friends of mine had said, look, with these organizations, you're lucky if you get 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, blah, blah, blah. We had an hour-long conversation.
Brilliant.
He said, the reason you didn't hear from me is I took this up to Vermont with me on vacation, and I just got back from Vermont. And I read the libretto twice with your symphonic music playing in the background. And I just think this is dynamite. I would love to do this at the Met. And Paul and I kind of stopped breathing for a little while. And we said, okay, so how's this work? What happens? He said, well, I wish I could tell you that I'm the one who makes decisions about this by myself. And I could just say, it's a done deal. But that's not how it works.
Right.
I said, I have to send this to about 4 or 5 other people in the house. Costuming has to look at it, and the orchestra people have to look at some of your symphonic scores that you've sent me, and we've got to talk about the nature of the hall and all of that stuff. And we said, okay, why don't you do that and get back to us? Well, we're going to be, as you know, waiting with bated breath. So as soon as you'll know, if you'll let us know, please. And he came back about a month later and he said, I am really sorry, but I have bad news. But we just don't think this is that we're the right house for this opera. And I sighed just like that. And I said, that's a shame. Can you tell me why? And he said, well, your opera, we think, is fairly intimate in its dramatic scope, and therefore what it requires of a hall itself. We really think that it'd be better in a hall probably from 1,000 up to 2,500. We're 3,500. We have to sell so many seats. And we have to have voices that are so large, it just would take away from the intimacy that you establish with your libretto. And again, I made a long pause, and I said, I can understand that. That actually makes sense to me. And then he said, the other reason is we've got this grant from the Mellon Foundation for $300,000. And we're going to put together 5 teams of young composers and young librettists and see if they can come up with something that might be interesting. And at that, I was young. Remember, this is 20 years ago, or I was younger. And I said, oh, come on. You and I both know that the likelihood of that producing anything is next to nil.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, yeah, we know that. But they gave us this money, so we got to do it. Okay? Now, I think it produced one group, one couple, so to speak, that went on and produced something that they didn't produce because the guy did it in French. And he said, we're not doing anything that you're doing in French. And it got produced up in Canada. But that's what happened.
Okay.
So then, and if I'm going on too long, you stop me. You let me know. But it's such a good story. Come on. And then what happened in 2008? Do you remember in 2008?
Oh, yeah. The mortgage crisis. Yes.
The
All
market
the money was
crisis.
gone. Mm-hmm.
And a third of our opera companies were gone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Paul talked to me one day and said, Dan, this is a pretty serious change in the artistic landscape.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have to write a scene so that people know what the actual opera itself sounds like. And I said, oh, God, okay. So I thought, I don't know what this opera is going to be like. I don't know what the music is going to be like. I better not start at the beginning because I don't know what the beginning should sound like. I have no idea.
Right.
So I took the second act and I started writing the first scene of the second act. And guess what happened? It kind of happened.
Mm-hmm. As it does with you. Mm-hmm.
And I thought, damn, I didn't know if I could write an opera. and this isn't half bad. I wonder if I could write another scene. So I wrote another scene. And then I said to myself, wow, if I write one more scene, I'll be a third of the way through this goddamn thing. So I did. And then I couldn't stop.
Et voila.
And that was that. I then wrote the third scene, the third act, and then I went back and wrote the first act. And I then went and orchestrated it, and the whole thing took me a long time, about, I think, 3 years altogether.
Yeah.
For a 2-hour opera, thereabouts. That's my guess.
But
I timed it.
But it's a winner.
And have you listened to it?
I've listened to part of it.
To parts of it?
To what I could find.
That's so exciting. I'm so delighted that you did. And then we spent from 2011 to 2023.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
10 or 11 years trying to find anybody who would do it, and I couldn't find anybody to do it.
Oh.
I contacted more opera companies than you could. I mean, every opera company that's in there in a book that says they're an opera company, I approached.
Mm-hmm.
In 2023, somehow, and I still don't remember how this worked, I found a woman named Lena Chandros who ran something called Momentum Artists. And I said, Lena, can you help me? I don't know what to do here. I'd gone through somebody else, a fundraiser, to try and help raise money for it, spent lots of money to try and make it happen. It didn't work. I found Lena at Momentum Artists, and I sent her these materials, and she said, I just think this is fabulous. Nobody's picked this up.
Mm.
I'll be happy to try and get performances for this. Happy to. Delighted to. So I said, great, let's do it. The first person she found was a guy named Stefanos Koronios.
Oh, yeah.
At Graziella,
Mm-hmm.
at Teatro Grattacielo. And he said, I love this. And we said, great. You know, Dan only needs $100,000 for, to pay for his 3 years of time and all the rest. And Stephanos came back and said, sorry, but we don't have that kind of money. we can't do that. Then a little company whose name I think was City Opera or something said, we'd love to do this. And a week before, they did site-specific locations.
Right.
The day before we were supposed to get together with the guy who signed the contract. He wrote us and called us and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I've just been fired, and the company's disbanding."
This journey, Daniel.
So then I did something like I called Jerry Schwartz and said, "Jerry, I'm not making any headway here, Jerry. What am I doing wrong?" And he said, "Well, it's really pretty simple. Given this new environment we're in, it's very rare for anybody to have the money to commission an opera. There are a few who do it. Minnesota has been commissioning the Medal Commission. But he said, the real easy way is if you find $1 million, almost any opera company in the country will do your opera." I said, "Oh. So it's pay for play." And he said,
Yeah.
That's pretty much the way the game is. And I said, "Oh." So I very seriously raised money. And I raised $100,000 from a few major donors. And we went back to Stephanos and we said, okay, what if we change the equation? What instead of you paying Dan $100,000, we provide $100,000? And he said, "Oh, now I can do your opera." The whole budget for the opera was about $350,000. So remember, this is for a week of, well, you know how this world works.
Of course.
This is a brand new opera done in New York. 1 week of rehearsals with the singers, and then 1 week in the hall. The whole thing in 2 weeks. I talked to my opera friends, and they said, "Oh, well, when I do an opera in Europe, we usually have 2 months to do an opera."
That's right.
Right? 2 months. They're doing it in 2 weeks. I said, "They're doing it in 2 weeks." They said, "Good luck. Good luck, man." I said, "Well, Stefano says, no, it's going to be a fabulous performance."
Of course you can do it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we did. He found the money, and then 2 years later, after we got together, June of 2026, and we have this performance. We have this rehearsal time and then 2 performances in La Mama. La Mama is 6 blocks away from where the club was. The club was at
Very exciting.
Broadway and 2nd, and La Mama at Broadway and 6th, or the Bowery and 6th. Anyway, I couldn't believe the singers when I heard them. They were so astonishing. I mean, everybody was off book. They knew this stuff cold. The tough stuff, okay, it took them 2 or 3 days to get the tough stuff with the piano, blah, blah, blah. Come into the hall, come into La Mama, sit down with the orchestra. The orchestra never has a rehearsal by themselves. Never. Okay, and we're going from Monday or Tuesday, whatever it was, first performance on Friday night, I think, yeah. And Thursday's the dress rehearsal, whatever. And it was not happening between the orchestra and the singers. And the orchestra did not know their music well enough. And I said to Stephanos, "This is going to be a fucking disaster." And he said, "No, it's not." And I said, "Explain to me." He said, "You don't understand. These are New York musicians." And I said, "Look, I know New York musicians. I've played with them for 15 years. I've conducted them." He said, "No, you don't know these guys. Now they know everything about this opera. They know exactly where it all works now. They are going to come in and they are going to nail the dress rehearsal." I said, "Okay, I'll believe it when I hear it." And all I can tell you is after the dress rehearsal, I cried on his shoulder for 2 minutes. This was a 20-year journey. I said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. They did it They know it. And guess what? You've been saying this is a great opera. And I've been wanting to believe you all along. And I've learned through the course of these rehearsals that I think it really works. But I still don't know about every moment of the pacing.
Yeah.
You know, does it work as good as Cosi? Does it work as good as Marriage of Figaro? I don't know. You know, it's his own thing. It's his own thing. But the problem, of course, in an opera is pacing and dramatic pacing and whether the drama flows. All I can tell you, and I said to him, I didn't get bored for a second. I was so engrossed. It wasn't my piece anymore. It was you're performing this piece that worked from beginning to end, where the music said what it needed to say, where the drama paced itself the way it was supposed to go. So, yeah, it's an experience, and it's almost a year later, and I still haven't come down from it yet.
Daniel, that is so exciting. I
Yeah.
just love, and the memory of Paul Pines, I mean, wrapped up in this.
Oh, you
It's
bet.
just, it's so
It,
divine.
it was as if Paul was hovering over it saying, hey, we did this. We did it.
You sure did.
We did
Wow.
it.
And
So,
you're performing again this,
well, Stephanos, before this was even up, he said, we're going to do this in 2 or 3 years again. I want to keep this in repertoire like I do any piece that I really believe in. He said the problem is it might be a little bit too long, and we can't afford to do a $3,500,000 production every year. You know, it's just we can't do it. So what we're working on now is a reduction for piano, synthesizer, and percussion, or maybe it's 2 pianos. I think it's 2 pianos, but
very
one of
cool.
them being with a synthesizer. And then we're going to figure out how to streamline some of the. So look, it's got 13 roles plus another 10 minor roles or something. You know, I mean, it's huge.
That's considerable.
I
Yeah.
mean, my idea when I wrote it, I said, look, I don't know if I'm ever writing an opera again. I'm writing the opera that I want to write, and let them figure it out. Let them figure it out. And by the way, I want to hear it with the full orchestra version, and I want to hear it in a big hall with all of the accoutrements. I mean, it was so fantastic what Stephanos did. It was an immersive experience. So the floor of La Mama was the club itself, filled with
Fabulous.
tables and the bar, and half of the audience sat at the tables. So all of the performers streamed in and around them and all the rest. And then in the back, it was graded going up. And then there were also rows there's what's it called? There's something going around the perimeter of the hall, 15 feet above. What do you call? There were people also sitting there.
That's
And
fantastic.
the chorus was up there.
Got it. Got it.
So Stephanos, just his whole team. I mean, look, I've seen operas. You know, I've been studying opera for 20 years and going to lots of contemporary operas. And in my estimation, almost none of them have worked for various reasons.
Right.
I won't, you know, look, either the music isn't good enough, or the libretto isn't good enough, or the way the two mesh doesn't work all
Quite.
together.
I would say that's the common one, right there.
That's the
Yeah.
common one.
Yeah.
And then, of course, then there's a matter of the production. But I, as a musician, look, the production to me, I don't go to hear Cosi or the Ring Cycle or the Magic Flute for the setting, for the presentation, for the dramatic staging of it. Other people do an opera, I know that. But for me, it's the music first,
the music,
right?
yeah.
It's the music. It's got to. Well, you know, and I know that in most contemporary opera, here's how it's put together. Okay, what book or movie do people know that might bring them into the house? Oh, cool. Okay, what singer can we get who will draw? Okay,
just named it.
great.
Yeah.
Get Friedrich von Stade, you know, get Horn, get somebody who's going to bring him in, get the star person. It's like a movie now. Third is, okay, who's the person who's going to stage it? You know, so it's got all sorts of bells and whistles. And then, oh yeah, there's that other stuff. What about the music? So who do you think should write it? That's the order. Because a lot of these people can't read music now who are making these decisions. The music
Yeah.
is like movie music to them. It's just background for the staging.
It's so true, Daniel. It's so
Anyway, so that's the world in which we live, and it took me a while to figure all of that out as well. By the way,
yeah.
it's
But
like,
I'm
oh, I
glad
see.
you saw this realized. Wow, how exciting.
Well, so am I. So am I. So now I haven't spent a lot of time. I have to admit, we've been recovering more, and now we got to think about, okay, so now how do we get this out to the next
Yeah.
cadre of people?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as you also well know, we live in a time where, as we've just described how the operatic world works, that affects this opera. Because most of the commissions and most of the performances, I'll say it very candidly, are not going to old, white, straight, Jewish guys. Okay? It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
understand. No, I
the
understand.
likelihood of this getting performed right away is not great.
Yeah.
Even though if everybody says it's a great opera, that's a roadblock.
We're fighting many sideline elements right now.
We are.
You
There's
know,
all sorts of stuff going on.
I've just got to say your journey has been fascinating. And I know we could go on all night talking,
We could.
but we might not be able to really practically. Before I let you go, I just have to ask you my main signature question.
Yes.
Is there one word or phrase which defines who you are to the depth of your soul?
I thought about this, and I'm still having trouble. So I'll say what I think should be said for every composer. You speak your soul, and you do it in the most straightforward, compact fashion that you can.
I love it. Thank you.
There you have it.
And thank you for sharing all this. It's been remarkable.
This has
Sometimes
been
I do interviews and I don't know what to expect, and this has been one of those filled with a lot of surprises. And most of all, this fantastic, just ebullient energy that you have that is at once exciting and at once laid back to the point of so thoughtful that it can only work. And I love that. But thank you.
That's very kind of you, and I will be happy to talk another time.
And we
if you
will.
would like. when you feel it appropriate. It's been a pleasure.
It really, Daniel, it has, and I can't wait to meet again so we could talk about your future projects, because I know you'll be coming back to Paul Pines and oratorios and a few works you've got on the boil, and it's exciting. So I'll
Yes,
leave.
do me a favor, and if you're willing, and I say this in any way you wish to take it, you see, say a little prayer for those further projects down the road. Everybody needs a little prayer and a little luck.
Right now, more than ever.
There you go.
But
Take care, Pamela.
You've helped that. Daniel, thank you. And to everyone listening, I want you to find Daniel Asia, which you can online plentifully. This is one of the most talented composers of this generation, and you need to know his work. Daniel, thank you again for being on Center Stage. And to everyone out there, you can find more interviews like this at Pamela Kuhn Official on social media. Center Stage with PamelaKuhn.com, at WGCH Talk Radio in Greenwich, Connecticut. And we all do our part to keep the arts spinning forward and plentiful. And I'll leave that with all of you. It's our responsibility. So to everyone out there, stay safe. This is Pamela Kuhn, and the curtain is now down on Center Stage.